Okay, good morning, dear friends and colleagues. I am Samuel Lee, and today I'm presenting this article named Development of an Instructional Model for Flipped Learning in Higher Education. So, this is my agenda for today. My introduction to this study. First of all, the purpose of this study is to develop a flipped learning design model which systematically and effectively guide designers throughout the design and implementation process of flipped learning at the higher education level. There are a lot of studies that shows unstimulating experience in the classroom will lead to no critical thinking, no creative thinking, no development of complex reasoning skills. So there is ongoing calls for innovation in higher education for how knowledge has been taught through traditional lectures. In the early 2000s, blended learning emerged as a response to such kind of challenges. So what exactly is blended learning? Blended learning means more discussion, it means interactive, it means flexible learning environment, it helps to foster values of higher education such as advanced research skills, scholarship skills, critical skills, and creative skills. But the issue with blended learning is that the typical mix of blended learning, as seen from literature, involve supplementary online discussion in addition to the normal traditional lectures. So, although blended learning is good, there are many challenges because the face-to-face components of the blended learning remains unchanged. So there's almost no effect of blended learning on the learners, no intended effect at least. The online activities that were used in blended learning did not engage learners at all. So there's no benefit out of the human interaction within the face-to-face classroom or getting the benefit from online systems or technological systems and using technology or online systems to help learners pace their learning or provide them flexible access to learning or learning resources. So there is a need for flipped learning, which is also a kind of blended learning. So flipped learning, there is a good blend between face-to-face component and the online learning component. It does not just combine the two modes of learning, but rather it integrates and maximizes the advantages of both components so that they are complementary and not supplementary. So this requires the entire learning experience to be recreated, to be reorganized through using an instructional design model. So like what I mentioned, flipped learning is a type of blended learning. It's a better blend between the face-to-face and the online learning component. It combines asynchronous online lectures that students learn outside classroom time and synchronous face-to-face session where students interact with their peers or the instructors. So it is the main idea where human instructors do what they do best and technology do what it does best. So what is flipped learning? Inside classroom time is devoted to discovering and sharing ideas with one-to-one assistance, scaffolding, and inspiration. Outside classroom time, content delivery is offloaded onto online lectures, which are better at visual representation and self-pacing. So both components becomes core components, not supplementary components. Despite the advantages of flipped learning, there are challenges to flipped learning because flipped learning requires more preparation and deliberation for the face-to-face component so that the face-to-face component is genuinely interactive and will help learners, will allow them to achieve more than the traditional route of learning. The online lecture component must also be designed in such a way that the qualities are adequate to support students so that they can participate in their corresponding face-to-face session. There's also an issue where students may not view those high quality lessons because they are just basically distracted or they have poor self-regulation. So this design needs to create a tight link between what students do in class and what students do at home. Now the last challenge would be that there are not enough existing literature models because most of them provides design processes separately for online lecture and for classroom learning activities. So the purpose of this study, as previously mentioned, is to systematically and effectively guide designers throughout the design and implementation process of constructing an instructional design model. And in this case, we are using flipped learning at the higher education level as the context of this study. So, in regards to the design, this study aims to come up with the appropriate blend. How much should the face-to-face component be? How much should the online component be? Right. In terms of implementation, this study also intends to explore and guide the process for constructing and validating an instructional design model so that it also contributes to the growing literature on improving course level practice and educational innovation. So my research question will be as follows. What is an effective guide in the construction and validation of a flipped learning instructional design model to systematically support designers, instructors throughout their design and implementation at the higher education level? Research question 2. What is the balance required between the online component and the face-to-face component to maximize the benefits of both components for flipped classrooms? Research question 3. To what extent should the theoretical and practical roles within an instructional design guide the user so that the guide is flexible yet implementable for a chosen context? So just very briefly, I will show you on the literature review for blended learning. Basically, it comes from much of the literature review shows the 3C model. The 3C model has got three components: the communication component, the constructive component, and the content component. So content is needed to be available to learners. There is a communication component where learners interact with each other, and there is a constructive component where learners engage in the learning tasks. These 3C models provide, so these three components can be difficult to manage in terms of how much each component should be. So there are many kind of theory that supports the implementation of the three components, such as the course of communication theory, the media richness theory, and the media synchronicity theory. So the course of communication basically just tells us that the higher the course, the higher the communication, the higher the cost, then the more complex learning task it should be. The media richness theory cites upon the fact that the higher media, the richer media, should be the more important or more equivocal tasks, and the less rich media should be allocated as the unequivocal tasks. Okay. Then the media synchronicity theory tells us that there are two kinds of environment, the synchronous environment and the asynchronous environment. In the synchronous environment, there's a convergence process. So learners come together and try to reach a common understanding. In the asynchronous environment, there's a conveyance process. So learners basically just exchange information. So, yeah. Now, these are some of the literature review on flipped learning. So they are basically just micro level design and elements, and they are being arranged into online part and the face-to-face learning part. So the BL and FL literature are mapped onto the EDI process. The BL literature constitute the analysis step of the EDI process, and the FL literature was arranged in the design and development part of the EDI process. So this is my method, a summary of my method. So as you know from the purpose, my study wants to come up with a model, an instructional design model, to construct and validate the model so that it becomes a useful guide for practitioners. So at the model construction stage, okay, there are two kind of approaches being used: theoretical approaches and practical approaches. In our study, we are using both approaches. Theoretical approaches means referring to literature and getting the insights from literature to construct the model, which I've mentioned just now, the literature review being pushed into the EDI model, and the practical approaches, meaning that it is being used as a case study. So for our case study, we are getting insights from both approaches into the model constructions. Then we will also validate this model through using internal model validation and external model validation. So and then once we get the feedback from internal model validation and external model validation, there will be a summary of findings which will go back to which will be reiterated to change the model or in helping to validate the model again. So in terms of model validation, like what I've mentioned, there's the internal model validation and the external validation. So in the internal validation, there are three kinds of validation: the model usability tests and expert reviews. So there are three designs being used: the initial design, the second design, and the final design. There are two model usability tests on the initial and second design, and an expert review on the final design. Now, the external validation consists of three kind of factors. The first one would be a survey on mathematics, VAMS, reflection journals, and student satisfaction survey done on the 7th week, and the follow-up interview for selected learners done on the 15th week. Now, in the internal model validation, from the first model usability test, participants from the first group reflected upon the FL design process, and individual interviews were conducted to collect their insights. The interview questions query about the conceptual and actual design tasks, and this feedback goes into revising the second flipped learning design. At the second model usability test, the second MUT adopted the questionnaire from Tracy's model development study. The items in the MUT queried about the usability of the overall FL design model and specific stages of the model, as well as the resulting procedures. Participants were the same as in the first group, but with the addition of 3 experts from the second group. Insight goes into revising for the final FL design. So basically, the MUT is performed to help reiterate the initial design into the final design. Okay. For the expert reviews, the expert review is done at the final design stage. So there are 5 experts from the second participants group that were asked to answer questions on validity, which were defined by explicability and comprehensibility, and usability and generality. So 4 experts did face-to-face interview, while 1 expert did questioning through email. So the Content Validity Index (CVI) and the Inter-Rater Agreement (IRA) were calculated and reported. The CVI is a measure of how valid the model is and is calculated by dividing the number of experts with positive rating. And the IRA measures the reliability of their ratings and overall agreements among experts. A CVI of more than 0.80 is recommended. Now for the external model validation, like what I've mentioned just now, there is VAMS, reflection journal, and student satisfaction. So in the mathematical survey in VAMS, it measures learner epistemological belief and attitude by having them choosing 2 opposing sentences on maths. 2 items related to authentic learning tasks and collaborative learning were added. The responses were being coded on a Likert scale and analyzed using SPSS. The Cronbach alpha value measuring the internal consistency of the questionnaire was about 0.79, which is good enough. There's also the reflection journal, where learners were asked to record their reflection after each class. The content from reflection journals will be quantitatively and qualitatively analyzed. Okay, so it is basically mainly qualitatively analyzed for content reflection, process reflection, and critical reflection. There is also a student satisfaction survey, where a survey is given at the 7th week of the class and a follow-up interview on the 15th week of the class for selected students. Okay, these are the participants. There are 3 groups of participants. The first group of participants consists of the 1 university professor and 3 teaching assistant. Second group of participants were 5 professors that were invited from universities in the US and the South Korea. They come from different fields and they are experienced in flipped learning. Then the third group of participants are basically the learners. There are 18 students being enrolled in the course, and they participate only in the external validation, the VAMS, the reflection journal, and the student satisfaction survey. Okay, so this is also a development process of the design model, and in this summary, we can see clearly that there are 3 designs: the initial design, the second design, and the final design. So before the initial design, there was a instructional design team consisting of the participants in the first participants group. They refined the tentative design, as you have seen in the model previously. They refine the tentative design and they come up with they construct with the initial design, and they use the initial design for their teachings, and they answered the first model usability test. So the response from the first MUT were used to refine the initial model. Then once the initial model is being refined into the second design, the 3 experts from the expert review team joined the first participants group and then undergone a second model usability test for the second design. So responses from the second model usability test were used to revise for the final design. The second MUT shows that there are 2 significant ways for improvement. First is to divide the design into the course level design and the lesson level design, meaning that it is divided into a macro level where the goal, content, the learner, the environment, the content outline and instructional strategy is being designed. And at the lesson level design, it is more of a micro level where the objective of each lesson, the design and the development of the online and F2F sessions were being taken care of. The second significant way to improve is to include the formative evaluation step in the center of the model to reflect how the actual flipped learning design process happens. So after the second MUT, the final design is being developed, and then the final design undergone the expert review and the external validation, which includes the VAMs, the reflective journals, and the student satisfaction survey. So the expert review shows that the CVI and the IRA, which we have mentioned just now, was higher than 0.80, which is more than is recommended, which is a good enough case. A few improvements were suggested from the expert review. That is, the rapid prototyping process should be represented at both course level and lesson level. The design should provide a clear textual and visual representation of the flow of the design process. The design should provide clear description of the implicit assumption and usage scenario of the mode. Okay, so next we can see this is the initial model. So the difference from this initial model to the tentative findings were that the detail at the micro level were being considered. Okay, this is the final model. So we can see that at the final model stage, the model was being divided into the course level, which is the semester level, and the lesson level. Okay, there's also the prototype being adopted, yeah, and the iterations, yeah. So the final FL design can be used for three scenarios. A full set of online session is developed, followed by a development of a full set of face-to-face session that is separate. Then implementation can be started after the development of a separate online session and a separate F2F set of sessions. Yeah. It can also be used in the second scenario where a full online set of instructions is first developed, and the face-to-face session is then developed in relation to the online session. Then it is being ready for immediate implementation. The third scenario will be the most ideal case where there are already paired online and face-to-face sessions that are already developed in relation to each other, and they are ready for implementation. The student satisfaction survey shows that there were positive and negative responses. So the positive comments were that there was enhanced motivation for learning. Most students value that they are able to pause and repeat video clips when they did not understand and have time to reflect and think deeper. Students also appreciate that there are more opportunities for discussion and active engagement in the overall learning process, which enhance motivation for learning itself. However, some complaints that there's limited time for problem solving during the face-to-face session. Students also complain of heavy workload due to being required to view lecture clips out of class time, discussion, participation, and reflection journals, which take a lot of their time. Some students also complain the inaccessibility of instant question and answer when learning with lecture clips. So, like what we have mentioned, there's also a follow-up interview conducted at the final week, the 15th week of the semester for selected students, basically for 3 students who were the most happiest and 2 students who were the least satisfied when they initially participated in the 7-week survey. So all students, including the least satisfied, expressed great satisfaction with the FL design model. Students reported that they appreciate the opportunities for active participation. They reported that the availability of online lectures helped them to pause, rewind, and rethink. Uh, the only the only main critique was that there is an increased workload even among those who feel that FL is being good for them, like for learner D. Learner A, B, C, and E reported that there's increased motivation due to the activities, and they were able to engage in more profound understanding. All students mentioned that they would take a FL course again in future if it is available in future semester. So for the VAMs, the parametric and non-parametric statistical tools were used to treat the VAMS reflection. So finding from the post-VAM scores were all higher than the pre-VAM scores. Studies suggest that people with low VAM scores held simple views towards maths, while people with high VAM scores showed advanced mathematical views and epistemological belief closer to the experts. Students with higher VAMS scores regard knowledge as being variable, as provisional agreement complex and constructed by interaction. So students with higher VAM scores tend to have better mathematical problem solving ability and a more remarkable ability to synthesize information than naive viewers. Students with lower VAM scores regard knowledge as being solid, being absolute, structured, separate, and stable truth. So research indicated that VAMs rarely increase in a short period of time, like in a single semester. So this suggests that the difference between the post-VAMs and pre-VAMs scores is really a positive impact from the FL course. For the reflection journals, teaching assistants that were assessing the reflection journals felt that there was a qualitative improvement in the level of student reflective thinking. Initially, the journals were more like reflections in the diary, but towards the end of semester, there was more critical thinking shown by the students. So the reflection journals were being assessed through a combination of the quality of reflection, the punctuality of submission, and the scores for the reflection journals were increased throughout the semester. Now, there are some limitations of this study also. Studies showed that FL does not show significant improvement compared to traditional learning when using the same type of measurement. Meaning, if they use scores, as in results, as an instrumentation for measuring flipped learning, it may not show good improvement. So for our study, we are using epistemological belief to measure flipped learning, to measure the student's improvement. This is also only a single case study, and findings from this study may not be applicable in other contexts. So even though that the experts come from different disciplines, implementation in their own course can reveal different aspects of the FL design. The context of this study may also be only more limited and relevant to natural sciences, but may not apply to other disciplines as in liberal arts, social science, or performing arts. In the internal validation of the final model, the experts that were engaged, they gave different views. Experts who were closer to being as a practitioner prefers a more specific model, and experts who are more closer to being a theorist, they prefer a wide-ranging generalized model. However, the more specific the model, the less transferability and narrower the application. The more wide-ranging or more generalized model, the more ineffective it is for implementation. So there's a need to balance between coming up with a specific model or one that is generally applicable to a wide range of audience. There are also quite a number of merits for this research. So the final flipped learning design is specific to the context, good and easy for novice designers to use because it has been validated internally and externally. The model is in line with recommendation from previous literatures. So by having both online and face-to-face component, both of these components having a common analysis, implementation, and evaluation step, it can improve the integration of these two components because they are being aligned with a shared lesson objective, allowing free exchange of contents between the two components, meaning that contents from the face-to-face can go to the online or vice versa. So this will maximize advantage of each environment. The design model also creates a more systematic approach to the FL design at both the course level and at the lesson level. Interview data from students showed changes in their epistemological and classroom culture. So the FL design model may impact in terms of their innovation in learning from an institutional context. Now, coming to the last part, there are some directions for future research. In this study, the outcomes of the FL course were broadly defined as epistemological change, quality of reflection, and satisfaction, not about results, not about academic scores. So, observation throughout the semester revealed that there are other areas that has also positive outcome, such as study skills, presentation skills, collaborative skills, communication skills, and attitudes. So, in future, the design could have also consider other factors as part of the instrument. There's also a possibility that this study could balance between qualitative and quantitative assessment, content knowledge, and general competencies, research on more comprehensive approaches to evaluate the learning impacts of flipped learning. Then the last one would be that future directions can lead towards analyzing, assessing, designing, validating, and implementing FL learning for classes at the secondary school context or even at the primary school context. That would be all for my presentation.